I've been working as an Uber driver for a little over 3 years. I've had all kinds of clients sitting in the back seat of my car, but I must say this experience marked me forever, far surpassing any other I've ever had in this job. One night, I was driving through a wealthy area of Los Angeles. Okay, it's worth mentioning that I'm Venezuelan, but I've been living here for a few years now. That night, everything seemed calm. I was just waiting for a ride request since that's how I make my living. And then it happened. At around 9 p.m., I received a ride request. The pickup location was about 30 minutes away from where I was, but still within the wealthy part of the city. The request was made by a well-presented lady around 50 years old, according to her profile picture in the app. I immediately drove to the address, but it took me about 10 minutes longer than expected due to an accident on the highway that forced me to take a detour. That's just how this city is. Lots of traffic and lots of accidents, too. When I finally arrived at the destination, I stopped in front of the lady's house. I thought she would already be ready, or maybe even a bit annoyed by the delay. But when I got there, she wasn't outside yet, nor did she come out right away. In fact, to my misfortune, minutes passed, and she still didn't appear. I opened the app's chat to let her know I had arrived, but I noticed she had already sent me a message before that. However, the message made no sense at all. It was just a string of random symbols with no coherence or meaning. I didn't think much of it and sent her a message saying I was outside, apologizing for the delay. However, she didn't reply. Suddenly, I saw someone peeking through the upstairs window of the house. I couldn't see who it was because there was a sheer curtain that only revealed a silhouette. But one thing was certain, it was a male silhouette. I thought it might be her husband or son, maybe checking to let her know I was already there. I waited another 3 minutes and still no one came out. Then I checked my phone again and saw that she had sent a new message. "I'm sorry, I'm going to cancel the ride. I won't be going out anymore." To maintain good service, I replied that it was no problem and wished her a good night, even though I was a little frustrated. I had declined another ride request that came in almost at the same time as hers. But these things happen in this job, and it's not uncommon for passengers to cancel their rides even when the driver has already arrived. With that, I simply said, "God bless," and drove away. The night went on as usual. I did a few more rides and then went home to rest. The next day, I received a call from Uber. They told me the police were looking for me to question me because security cameras from a house had recorded my car parked in front of a residence where a woman had been murdered. The footage placed me at the scene just moments before the terrible incident. I was in shock and immediately went to the police station to clarify everything, as I had nothing to do with what had happened. There, they interrogated me and asked me to show the messages exchanged with the victim, the same lady who had canceled the ride the night before. I told them that I had seen a male silhouette in the window, but at the time I didn't think it was strange, so I just left. That's when they told me that the woman lived alone. The person I saw was the killer. They believe he was the one who sent the message canceling the ride. After the interrogation, I went home crying, overwhelmed with guilt. I kept thinking about what could have happened if I had called the police or stayed there longer. So many questions ran through my mind, but there was no way I could have known something so terrible was happening, and that the woman was in danger. I still work for Uber, but now I'm much more paranoid with every ride. I want to share a terrifying experience I had a few years ago at my grandmother's house. Although it's not an old building, that place has always made me uneasy. Something felt off, and for that reason, I avoided sleeping there whenever possible. Strange noises on the second floor were common, like balls rolling across the floor, hurried footsteps, or distant murmurs. At first, these sounds disturbed me, but over time, I got used to them and eventually stopped caring. My aunt lived on the second floor, and she worked at a hospital. She always said, with a worried tone, that she felt like she was bringing things home from work. Her stories got even creepier when she started mentioning the constant presence of a mysterious figure. According to her, a woman dressed entirely in black, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a long dress, was always watching her. She never touched her or caused any harm, but she was always there, silently staring. Months passed, and my aunt kept insisting on her disturbing visions, until one night, something even stranger happened. We were returning from a family gathering when, out of nowhere, she stopped the car in the middle of the street, pointed into the darkness, and firmly said, "There she is. Can you see her? She's standing right there." My grandmother immediately replied that she saw no one, and neither did I. There was nothing but darkness. Even so, I felt a deep chill as I watched my aunt stare into that void with such certainty. Her face showed genuine fear. My grandmother started praying in a low voice, and after a few minutes, my aunt sighed in relief, saying the woman had disappeared. We continued driving home in complete silence, an intense tension filling the air. A few weeks later, I had to sleep at my grandmother's house again. That night, as usual, everything was calm early on since my grandmother always went to bed around 9. But suddenly, I heard the front door burst open. It was a distant aunt whom I had never met in person until that moment. But according to my mother, she practiced witchcraft and rituals. She rushed upstairs, accompanied by my other aunt, and within minutes, the screaming began. At first, the screams were clearly female and recognizable, but they quickly changed, becoming deeper and more guttural, as if a man were shouting through her voice. It was terrifying. I stood frozen in the living room, unable to react, as my mother and grandmother woke up, startled. After several minutes of complete silence, my grandmother approached me, handed me an open Bible, and calmly ordered, "Go upstairs and leave this Bible open up there." To reach the second floor, I had to leave the house because the staircase was outside. Summoning all my courage, I stepped out, gripping the Bible tightly. But when I looked up at the top of the stairs, I froze. She was there. Exactly as my aunt had described. The woman dressed in black, her hat covering part of her face, standing completely still with her head bowed, blocking the entire passage. Without a second thought, I ran back down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. My grandmother, noticing my terror, decided to go with me. She held my hand tightly and said we would go together. We climbed the stairs again, left the Bible open in the upstairs living room, and avoided entering my aunt's bedroom. The night remained quiet after that episode, but since then, I only sleep there when I have no other choice. That aunt, the one involved with witchcraft, rarely visits, but I always hear stories about her dark practices. I've never had the courage to ask if my other aunt still sees that terrifying figure, or if something even worse has happened since. Still, I occasionally notice strange occurrences in the house, doors opening on their own, objects mysteriously shifting places. However, none of those experiences compare to the terror I felt that night, a memory that haunts me to this day, convincing me that something profoundly wrong dwells in that house. It was December 2022 when my girlfriend, Charlotte, and I decided to escape our routine and spend a few days in the Pocono Mountains. We booked a cozy and inviting Airbnb, perfectly decorated for Christmas, with breathtaking views of a nearby village. To enhance the cozy atmosphere, a snowstorm was forecasted for that night, so we left the city early to ensure we were stocked up and safe before the weather completely closed in. After a long 4-hour drive and a quick stop at Walmart to grab essential supplies, we finally entered the gravel road that wound up the mountain, surrounded by tall, dense trees. The house emerged from the thin mist and the first drops of snow, standing tall and decorated with illuminated reindeer, a large snowman, and candy canes lining the path to the front door. The spacious deck, featuring an inviting hot tub, seemed like the perfect place to enjoy the incoming storm. We made several trips between the car and the house, unloading groceries and luggage. As we stepped inside for the first time, we were greeted by a warm and festive atmosphere. The rustic scent of burning wood drifted from the large fireplace in the living room, and Christmas decorations adorned every corner. An elegantly decorated tree, stockings hanging on the walls, and soft holiday lighting. The house had 3 bedrooms, though we only needed 1. We chose the second room to settle into, and I quickly checked to make sure everything was working properly. A stocked fridge, a TV with Netflix access, and a quick glance out the window at the forest surrounding the property. The upper floor of the house was a loft with a pool table and some comfortable sofas, while the basement, surprisingly spacious, felt out of place compared to the rest of the home. Dark, cold, and better suited for laundry or an improvised workshop. We were settling in when an unexpected knock sounded at the front door. I went to answer and found a man in his 40s wearing gray sweatpants and a worn brown jacket. With a strange smile, he asked how we were doing and introduced himself as Thomas, saying he managed the Airbnb along with his brother, Marcos. He mentioned that he lived on a nearby property and offered to help if we needed anything. I found it odd that Thomas mentioned my girlfriend. Charlotte hadn't come to the door. I assumed Marcos must have told him about us and dismissed the uneasy feeling. Night fell, bringing with it the promised snowstorm. We prepared a simple dinner, chicken thighs, broccoli, potatoes, and cornbread, and curled up on the couch, illuminated by the Christmas tree lights, watching The Polar Express, the only decent movie available on streaming. After the movie, we decided to enjoy the hot tub, watching the snow fall gently, creating a perfect magical scene. Then suddenly, the bubbling jets stopped, and a tense silence took over the night. We clearly heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the surrounding forest. Charlotte and I exchanged alarmed glances. I considered calling out to ask who was there, but Charlotte stopped me, whispering that it might just be an animal. Deep down, we both knew those weren't the footsteps of any wild animal. They were human. Slowly, the sounds faded away, but the unease stayed with us. We quickly went back inside and decided to shower before bed. However, the hot water barely lasted a minute before turning ice cold, forcing us out of the shower. Frustrated, I texted the host, Marcos, explaining the issue. His response came half an hour later, surprised by the problem, and he promised to send someone to fix the heater in the morning. Unsatisfied but exhausted, we went to sleep. In the middle of the night, loud, violent knocks on the door abruptly woke us. Charlotte was terrified, gripping my arm and whispering for me not to answer. I immediately agreed and remained completely silent. The knocking stopped after 3 quick rounds, but the threatening presence lingered in the air. Quietly, I got up and locked the bedroom door, reinforcing our isolation until morning. At dawn, I sent another message to Marcos, informing him about the strange knocks during the night. He seemed surprised and, with some concern, advised us to call the police if it happened again. Not exactly reassuring, but it was the most reasonable thing to do. Before heading out to clear the snow from the car, I noticed fresh footprints around the house. They were recent, likely made during the night while we slept, which only increased my unease. I was examining the tracks when I saw Thomas approaching. I told him about the heater issue and took the opportunity to ask if he knew anything about the strange footprints. Thomas casually replied that some odd people wandered around the area, but assured me they weren't dangerous. Even though I remained suspicious, I let him inside to fix the heater. At that moment, I sent another message to Marcos to let him know that his brother was already there handling the repairs. Marcos's response came immediately, sending a chill down my spine. Brother? What brother? I don't have a brother. A shiver ran down my spine and instinct took over. I rushed to Charlotte and, without explaining much, told her to grab our things quickly and quietly. Dazed, we stuffed everything into our bags and bolted for the car. As I started the engine, I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror of Thomas approaching fast, holding something I couldn't identify. I didn't hesitate, I floored the gas and sped away. Later, we contacted Marcos again and urged him to call the police immediately. Hours later, we received a call informing us that the authorities had searched the property but found no one there. Since then, we have been haunted by the terrifying certainty that from the moment we arrived, Thomas was there, silently watching our every move. I can't even begin to imagine what could have happened if we had stayed just a little longer in that isolated Airbnb in the Pocono Mountains.